My name is Hodiak. I'm a retired journalist living in Florida, and this is the fourth and final segment in the series Who and What Created Trump? Lewis Powell Jr. and the Gaslighting of America. I hope you will watch the others if you haven't, because in the first one I describe a bit when I was a reporter in the Los Angeles Bureau of the Associated Press. I covered some of the campaign of Ronald Reagan when he was running for governor of California on the Republican ticket, and there are a couple of things that I think I can tell you that you don't know. Now, gaslighting. I interpret gaslighting as manipulating the other person, giving them information that you want them to believe is for their own good, but it's for your own good. And this, to a large extent, has happened in America in recent decades, and I hope this segment will explain how it happened. Now, one thing that we have to be cautious about is to think that Trump is the problem, because by February, I'm pretty sure that Trump will be gone. He was not the problem. He was the symptom. He was able to use the system to his own advantage. It's the system that is the problem. And I hope that the four people that I talk about here give you kind of an idea how America slowly moved into the situation where 63 million people could vote for Trump, because a lot of them discounted who he was, his character. They just wanted to protest. They were so angry at Washington, where we have the best Congress money can buy. They were so angry at a rigged system which favored a certain small portion of the people. Now, when Biden is sworn in as president, the fight will only begin. Biden becoming president is reaching first base. It's going to be very, very hard to change the system because it's entrenched. There are millions of people who profit tremendously from it. Remember, in the 1930s, when Franklin Roosevelt was trying to get his New Deal going, the bankers, the very rich, many of the establishment people, they fought him bitterly. They called him a traitor to his class, and his reply was, I invite their hate. I welcome their hate, because he was such a strong person. And what helped him to get the New Deal going was that he had the people behind him. They knew that he was thinking of them. He wanted to help them. And in a way, he saved the asses of the rich, because without Roosevelt, I am sure that America would have become socialist or even worse, because so many people were, again, in the same kind of situation. America's problem is a system created over the past 50 years that hugely favors the rich and the corporations and gives short shrift to the working men and women of America. Currently, 1% of the population has 40% of the country's wealth, which is more than all of America's shrinking middle class has. America's middle class today is no longer the richest in the world. But it is not this that angers so many people. It is the unfairness. Would you believe there is today more social mobility in Europe than in America? If you are poor in Europe, you have statistically a better chance to make it into the middle class or higher than here, the land of opportunity. I know you are surprised. Do a little research on this. Our present system was created with cries of freedom, liberty, and free enterprise, but Trump himself said the system was rigged and Washington was a swamp, meaning a den of corruption, meaning a place where money ruled. But when elected, instead of working to change the system, Trump concentrated on illegal immigrants, China, building a wall, and those, quote, animals and thugs protesting in the streets. They were the problem. You can see why the vested interests loved Trump. He was distracting voters from the real problems, distracting them from the real issues. His rich supporters loved that. They just didn't expect that Trump would become such a disaster. Anyway, in 1971, Lewis Powell Jr., a corporate lawyer who sat on the board of directors of 11 corporations, wrote a memo of many pages to his friend, the president of the American Chamber of Commerce. It made a huge impression, and the president resent the memo to all his affiliates across America, which today has some 7,000 branches. Soon, the executive suites of corporations got copies, copied the memo, and sent it to others. Called the Powell Manifesto, it eventually changed America. The manifesto was supposed to be private, but it was leaked to a reporter and became public. There was a war going on in America, Powell wrote, a war against free enterprise, and the enemy was within. He described the enemy as new leftists, revolutionaries, communists, but the enemy was also the media, the arts, Hollywood, for example, and even scientists. The enemy included college professors, students on campuses, and Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader, a few years earlier, Nader had published a book titled Unsafe at Any Speed, accusing the American auto industry of building unsafe cars. Nader zeroed in on the Corvair built by General Motors, which at that time was facing more than 100 lawsuits brought by injured customers. GM's executives were not pleased. They had Nader's home and office telephones bugged and then sent some prostitutes to tempt Nader in an effort to compromise him. When all this was exposed, Nader sued and was awarded $300,000. That is around $3 million in today's money. Nader put the money into his organization. Congress eventually passed laws requiring cars to be made safer, like stronger bumpers, stronger frames, and the installation of seat belts. Powell, who 2 months after writing the memo was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court by President Nixon, he couched his manifesto as a fight for freedom and democracy. But in my view, Powell was saying if the top executives and the rich did not do something, they would face higher taxes, corporations would face more regulations and restrictions, and even the type of socialism that was developing in England, France, Germany, and Italy. In Powell's view, corporations and Wall Street should be able to do what they want. The rich should be able to pass on their wealth without estate taxes. If you Google Powell Manifesto, you can read the original memo. Powell urged his readers to become more active in Washington, increase contributions to senators and congresspeople, hire more lobbyists. Today, lobbyists in Washington outnumber members of Congress 20-1. But here was Powell's real stroke of genius. He advised to educate the public, convince the public to support the manifesto's goals. You would do it by creating think tanks filled with PhDs in economics, political science, and other specialties. The think tanks and the various other organizations would hire professors, journalists, defeated members of Congress. They would write books, articles, op-ed pieces published in top newspapers, challenging the new leftists. They would be available for reporters to call to get their views on social and economic issues. Any organization could call on them to give a talk or lecture. Paul Ryan, the former Speaker of the House, by the way, is now with one of the think tanks. Soon, the country also had Fox News, which became enormously influential. Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity became media stars. They got a lot of their intellectual ammunition from the think tanks. The information and the thinking began to kind of trickle down to the mass audience. People like the Koch brothers and Richard Scaife of the Mellon fortune jumped right in, spending hundreds of millions of dollars on think tanks, publications, and on establishing organizations. They had patriotic names, or such names as Americans for Prosperity or Citizens for a Sound Economy. People like Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh became incredibly rich, convincing their listeners that Americans weren't like those effete Europeans with their social safety nets, their health care for all, their high taxation. America is a land of rugged individualism. Anyone can become a multi-millionaire. That's certainly true for Hannity and Limbaugh. Both own private jet airplanes, and Limbaugh relaxes in a $67 million estate in Palm Beach. Socialism to them is Satanism. People forget that Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the post office are socialism. The United States is the only developed country in the world that has made the health of its citizens into a business. It took years, but eventually thousands of loopholes were attached to bills. A lot of deregulation took place, unions were crippled, and workers' wages stayed pretty much stagnant. Loopholes enabled a billionaire like Trump to pay $750 in federal income taxes in 2016 and again in 2017. In the new system, workers weren't important. It was the investors who were important, the people with money. And if you say, well, everybody has money, have you noticed that there was a report some months ago that the average family in America does not have even $500 for emergencies? Soon, many corporations did not have to pay any federal income taxes at all. Last year, 91 American corporations paid nothing in federal income taxes. General Electric had more than 100 lawyers whose only job was to find ways not to pay federal taxes. For many years, GE had billions of dollars in profits annually and paid zero federal taxes. GE President Jack Lynch got the nickname Neutron Jack because while he made investors very happy, he was ruthless with the workers. A few years ago, Amazon reported an annual profit of $9 billion and paid zero federal taxes. Yet, when the city of Seattle, where Amazon is located, wanted to impose a $15 an hour minimum wage, Jeff Bezos, owner of Amazon, fought against it. He has been described as the world's richest man. In the 1980s and 1990s, a strange thing began happening. Tens of millions of working people started voting for conservative Republicans who gained more and more power, not always in presidential elections, but much at the state level and Congress level. The South went Republican. This was largely due to President Nixon's, quote, Southern strategy. Nixon essentially told the Southern states, vote for us and we will leave you alone. Civil rights is your business. States' rights, you know. But what about a state like Kansas with its struggling ranchers, dying farm towns? Why did it vote by a huge 80% margin for President George W. Bush? Why were Kansans electing politicians for positions in their state and in Washington who were the enemies of working people. They were against unions, any type of regulation on corporations, any tax increases. They were against Obamacare, against any safety regulations for workers, or increasing the minimum wage. They succeeded in reducing the state funding for the public schools of Kansas. Thomas Frank, a native of Kansas, decided to visit his childhood state to find out how this happened. Driving in Kansas, he noticed a sticker on the back of a car that said, "A working person who supports Democrats is like a chicken that supports Colonel Sanders." After talking to hundreds of Kansans, Frank explained how all this happened in his book titled, "What's the Matter with Kansas?" I don't have the space to describe what is in the book, only to say it is very well written. In short, Powell had succeeded, or his disciples have succeeded. The gaslighting and propaganda worked beautifully. Unfortunately, years later, Kansas was described as a barely breathing, dysfunctional state. Its public education system was near collapse. A wag said Kansas Republicans wanted their voters to be stupid, otherwise they would not get reelected. And reelected they were. Today, with the exception of a Democratic governor, the state is still in Republican hands. So Republicans hate taxes, yet corporate executives want educated employees, healthy employees, employees with access to decent roads to get to work. They want their employees to have access to clean water and good sanitation. Of course, this is not a problem to the 1%. Bad schools, private schools. Huge medical bills, no problem. College costs, we can handle them. Bad roads, that's the chauffeur's headache, and the luxury SUV can handle bad roads. Unsafe places, bodyguards and private security people, no problem. Quote, "Taxes are what we pay to have a civilized society," said former Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. Trump disagrees. He's more in line with Leona Helmsley, New York real estate queen, who said, quote, "Only the little people pay taxes." Trump has managed to pay less than even the little people. In many years, nothing at all. If you think the problem is those awful Republicans, you should read another book by Frank titled "Listen, Liberal." Democrats have been co-opted by the system as much as the Republicans. You will remember that Trump ran as a populist. He told working people, "You have been forgotten. You will be forgotten no more." He told them the system was rigged and corrupt. He was talking to people who were so angry that they would have voted for Donald Duck as president rather than an establishment Washington politician. America is becoming a winner-take-all society, a banana republic. The inequality, the obscene incomes and wealth of some people, the successful blaming of ethnic groups and races have all created rage. Even Trump has portrayed himself as a victim. Not only that, Trump believes his own government is plotting against him. Meanwhile, government statistics state that 1 child out of 5 in America is, quote, "food insecure." These children do not get enough nutritious food to function well in school. America has been dropping steadily in world statistics concerning health, social mobility, education achievements of the students, and even longevity. With 5% of the world's population, it harbors 21% of coronavirus deaths. It also harbors a quarter of the world's jail inmates. Maybe that is why Stephen Brill titled his book Tailspin, subtitled "The People and forces behind America's 50-year fall and the people who are fighting to reverse it. Brill, a lawyer, founded Court TV and the American Lawyer magazine. His explanation of how the new meritocracy serving the rich has helped torpedo America is fascinating. Granted, this is still a land of opportunity. I'm sure there are at least 1 million people in America who were born with nothing and today are hugely successful. But to a large extent, these are the very bright, the courageous, the driven. They are the type of people that can rise in most societies. What about the decent, hard-working people who cannot do or want to do calculus, but are good with their hands? What about the low-skilled people who need a living wage? They take care of our children and of grandma and grandpa in nursing homes and assisted living places, pick and harvest the crops delivered to supermarkets, they stock store shelves, they wash and clean in hospitals, offices, homes, and the streets. They are much more valuable to us than the hedge fund managers who shift money around but add no value to the economy. Americans are not envious of self-made winners, but they resent a relatively closed system that is becoming almost hereditary. Of the 10 richest families in America, 6 inherited their wealth. Yet the great steel magnate Andrew Carnegie said, "A man who dies rich dies disgraced." Not that billionaires should start giving away most of their money, just that they should not fight a $15 an hour wage. They and the corporations should not be allowed to successfully lobby Congress for a $1.3 trillion tax cut when the government needs the money to repair the country's crumbling bridges, roads, sewer systems, and water systems. Let me finish by describing a bit of Trump history. Trump's father really owed his fortune to the government. After World War II, there was a great need in America for affordable housing. 1 million GIs had come back from the war, got married, became parents. To inspire housing construction, the government passed legislation offering low-interest construction loans that it then guaranteed, so banks were taking no risks. Trump's father jumped at this chance and soon was building many apartment buildings in Brooklyn and Queens. At age 21, Trump's father gave him $14 million to start a real estate business. Trump lied about it, saying he only got $1 million, but everything I talk about here has been documented by investigative reporters. They got many of the Trump financial records from Mary Trump, Donald's niece. We now know that Trump was a lousy businessman, and according to the New York Times, has a personal debt of more than $430 million that he must pay off within 4 years. Much of that debt appears to be to foreign entities, making Trump a national security risk. Trump's business career shows he was a real loser and sucker. He jumped into businesses he knew nothing about. Sorry for that jibe, but I am a veteran of the Vietnam era. I deeply resent my friends being called suckers or losers because they were killed or captured, especially by this bone-spur coward. To keep Trump afloat, his father injected some $400 million over the decades into his son's businesses. Trump was constantly protected and repeatedly saved from his mistakes. On The Apprentice reality show, viewers saw a dynamic, competent executive. They didn't know that a lot of The Apprentice was scripted, and it was the producers, not Trump, who decided who was to be fired. When Trump famously said, "You're fired," he was following orders. In 2015, The Hollywood Reporter said that buried in Trump's financial documents was a pension payment to Trump of $110,000 from the Screen Actors Guild. Trump labored 14 years on The Apprentice. He earned $197 million from the show, but also $230 million by selling his celebrity name as a brand. There were once Trump mattresses, Trump vodka, steaks, neckties, cologne, and his name was emblazoned on many hotels and office buildings, but he had nothing to do with their planning or construction or financing. I guess a lot of Trump voters don't care about all this, but I only partially blame them. The ground was prepared for them by all the people I mentioned, but also by many others who sold out. If I should go and ask all the senators and congresspeople, are you a Christian? An overwhelming majority would say yes, but half of them have no scruples in supporting the most immoral, crooked, and disastrous president in American history. According to polls, 80% of evangelicals support Trump. Jesus would be appalled. This makes me think of the quote by George Bernard Shaw, "Christianity is a wonderful religion. Too bad it had never been tried." Sorry for this insertion, folks, but when I was working on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, I was also the religion editor. You could say many things about Trump, but there's no doubt that in 2016 he was a master campaigner, a genius at capturing votes. He believed his lies that made him so effective. He believed he was the smartest man anywhere that made him so dangerous. But what excuse do the Republican senators have who have been clicking their heels and enabling Trump? The Republican senators are Trump's Praetorian Guard. I know, they got the federal judges, the Supreme Court justices, deregulation, the tax cut, but are the working men and women better off? Trump is trying to run a grievance campaign, but hasn't all this happened on his watch while he was commander-in-chief? Who ever heard of a Republican Party running a candidate for re-election without a political platform of goals that it wants to accomplish? How can you strive to kill Obamacare with nothing to replace it? And what about the famous wall? Would you believe that so far only 5 miles of new wall has been built? The rest is replacements or repairs for old crumbling walls or barriers. President John Kennedy said, "Scratch an American and you will find an immigrant." I am an immigrant. Immigrants have been the lifeblood of America. My father was a Ukrainian nationalist and had to flee Ukraine, and America saved him and gave his family refuge. Trump has convinced the world that immigrants are no longer welcome in America. Bob Woodward, the author of Rage, recently said Trump is trying to, quote, assassinate the presidency. Trump's performance in the first debate was pathetic. Viewers saw an unprepared, loose cannon constantly interrupting Biden. So what's left for Trump? How about fascism? Long ago, Sinclair Lewis wrote a novel, It Can Happen Here, because in the 1930s, many Americans were attracted to fascism. Hero aviator Charles Lindbergh spoke glowingly of Hitler. A Catholic priest, Charles Coughlin, hosted the most popular radio program in the country. In 1936, Coughlin said, "I take the road of fascism." Madison Square Garden in New York held fascist rallies. When fascism comes to America, Lewis wrote in his book, it will be wrapped in the flag and will be carrying the cross. During the debate, Trump refused to condemn white racism and told his supporters to, quote, stand by. America is at a crossroad. Do we want to have a community, solidarity as Americans, a united country? America has the chance to become a less unequal, more tolerant and open society, a mosaic of the world, dynamic, fertilized by diversity. It could become a beacon to the world, the society of the future, a truly successful, brave new world. Please, God, yes! That's the end of my four-part series. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, please tell others. Please put it on your Facebook. You can sign off now, but if you have a couple of minutes, I'd like to tell you about my as yet unpublished book in English. And that requires a bit of a backstory. My family fled Ukraine long ago. They didn't want to live under communism. My father was a Ukrainian nationalist, and that was very dangerous to be that then. And they brought me to America when I was 9 years old, where I grew up. So you can see that I have an interest, empathy, and sympathy for Ukraine. I have worked there. I have a Ukrainian wife and so on. Anyway, when I retired, I thought I can write a book to raise the spirits of Ukrainians and really to kind of explain some things that many people don't know about or understand. And I wrote the book. I went to Ukraine. I had it translated, and it was published there. And in fact, here it is, if you could see it. It got some good reviews, and I got some very nice letters from people. And slowly it sold out. And 2 years ago, a second edition was published. And my son was, who is very fluent in Ukrainian and English, told me not long ago, he said, Dad, your English version is so much better. You come across so much better. And I thought, why don't I get it published here in America? It's for everybody, just like the Bible is for everybody. I was a religion editor. That was one of my jobs at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette for many years. So I had an interest in this subject. The title of my book is Unknown Christ. The subtitle is For Those Who Want to Believe but Cannot, for those who have lost God but want to find Him. And it is for thinking people who respect science and logic and rationality, and yet have kind of neglected the spiritual side because they are still thinking of the old mythology and all the things that you can really not believe in anymore, like devils running around in hell and sticking pitchforks into Stalin and Hitler and all that stuff. So this is not a come to Jesus book. The evangelicals would hate it. I remember when I was 17, I raised my fist to the sky and I said, God, if you exist, I hate you. You are a monster. I could not understand the evil and injustice in the world. Well, it took me a long time, decades really, but I learned that the problem wasn't with God, that my God was too small. And I try to explain this, that there is no war between science or good rational thinking and religion or spirituality. What I'm getting at is I would like to have it published in the United States. If you know a publisher or if you know somebody who works for a publishing house, please send me a contact. Put it in the comments below or send me an email, and I will send them sample chapters and information on it. I don't want any vanity publishers. I'm not interested. And yes, I could send the material to the publishers, and it'll go into the slush pile, and somebody will give it a few seconds look. But if I can find somebody who really would be interested in this type of a book, that would make a difference. And like I said, this book came out of many decades of my own life, my journey toward faith, and it made such a tremendous difference in my life today. I'm very old, but I'm excited about living. Every day is an adventure. And the second half of my book is also tries to be practical. It it shows you why the law of attraction is really a fraud in some ways, but in a certain sense, it is true. And I try to explain it by asking the question, why did the first Christians, why were they so strong spiritual? They could heal themselves, they could heal others, they were courageous. And how can we get that back? So that is also what I write about, because I've been struggling with this all my life, and I finally reached a decent understanding. So please, if, like I said, if you can give a contact, I would appreciate it. And don't forget to tell your friends about this, because really, we need to change the system. It's not as if we're going to have somebody come and save us, and it's going to be a long, hard slog. This is the greatest country in the world, but look what has happened to it in the last 50 years. It's no accident that Stephen Brill, a really smart guy, titled his book Tailspin. America has been in a tailspin for 50 years, and we have to understand how it happened and how to claw our way back. Thank you.